Well, I can tell you why everyone's talking about him. It's because every other English batter in the world has been tried, right? So there's the first answer to your question. He's probably I first started hearing about him when he was what 16, 17. Everyone thought he was a future Joe Root type level player. Um, had he not have been involved in this scandal, you talk about his criminal past. I don't think he's been charged with anything criminal, right? He was obviously the judge absolutely slapped him down quite rightly for the nonsense that he was involved with, and his friend obviously has gone to jail for rape. And Joe Clarke will always be tainted by that. But I don't think he has a criminal past. But I think if he was not involved in that scandal, I'd be shocked if he wouldn't have played a game for England already. So I think there is a point of which where people and I haven't talked to George or Matt Roller about this or anyone who's written about this piece. But I think there's a point at which it's quite clear that England are getting closer to picking him. So if you're asking why they're writing about him, my guess is they're hearing things that he's close to being, he's on the verge of the team. I don't think they're just writing about him. But as you said, I can't remember what his first class numbers were, but I don't think they were that spectacular. But everyone knows how talented he is, and he's certainly a next level talent, certainly an international quality player, whether he makes it as an international player or not. So I think that answers why they're writing about him. The thing about journalism is, and I haven't talked to George or Matt about this, or Jonathan Liu, who just wrote another piece on the other side of it. But all these people are coming to it from different viewpoints. I think knowing George really, really well, George tries to forgive people as much as possible, and always looks. George will always look for the second chance option on a human being. That's, I think, part of his mantra as a person. I think he got the piece wrong. I think he didn't understand, like a lot of men, they don't actually understand what these things say to women directly. Um, I think it was silly of the cricketer to not really factor in that women were going to be upset about this. Forget men for a minute, because there were plenty of men who were upset. But I think it was silly for the cricketer to not understand that women were going to see this issue completely differently than men did. Especially, there's enough women cricket fans and cricket writers and cricket women in media out there now that I don't think that that's an acceptable way of looking at things anymore. Jonathan Liu's piece was on the other side of that. So I don't know if you haven't seen that one, but yeah, it's interesting that you didn't mention that, because that is part of it, right? Is Jonathan Liu comes from one point, Matt Roller comes from another point, George comes from that point. I would say all three of those people would probably vehemently back their articles, right? Because they wrote them. They probably wouldn't have written the Joe Root piece, the Joe Clarke piece, if they didn't feel it. My personal views, look, I've certainly been in franchise, not with Joe Clarke, but with other players, where teams have asked me, whether they should get this player, and I said no, based on other trials around the world and other things with particular teams. I'm certainly not going to come out and write a pro Joe Clarke piece. If he does get picked, I'll probably write a piece about. And I haven't heard any whispers about that, but I'm assuming everyone's writing about it, so he must be getting close to being picked. I think Rob Key talked about him recently. Um, uh, I'm more than happily write that. I'm not going to write about a player who's not even playing yet. If that's what you're asking, I haven't written about, him because he's not playing at that level. One thing I found interesting was that Johnson Liu said that he could play for franchise teams and he could play for Nottingham, but he couldn't play for England. That bit I don't really understand. Um, uh, he's representing the county of Nottingham, right? He's representing, I can't remember whichever big bash team it was. He's representing all those different beliefs. I'm not sure that I get that side of things. My big problem with Joe Clarke is watch what happened with Azim Rafiq. And I think that Azim Rafiq, when the comments came out about him and the anti-Semitic comments, he went out of his way to reach out to people in the other community that he affected. Where's Joe Clarke done that? I haven't seen it. I'm not saying he's not sorry. I'm not saying he doesn't agree with that. But I think Jonathan Liu might have mentioned this, and this probably would have been my angle if I'd written a piece of, when you have someone like that, and I've seen this with match fixers, right? There are genuine match fixers who really understand that they fucked up, right? And the ICC then use them to train other players, right? And literally say, here's this guy, he's now going to come to you and say this. There is a huge problem with misogyny in the way that cricketers treat women, in my experience. And Joe Clarke, if he is reformed, and who knows if he is a perfect person to go, do you know what? This is what I used to do. This is what I used to think. And this is what I shouldn't, why you shouldn't do it and why it's a stupid way of thinking about these things and what it led to, right? Joe Clarke has never been charged with rape, as far as I'm aware. I obviously wasn't found guilty of rape, but he was involved in a game that led his friend to be involved, to be charged with rape, right? And I think that on that particular note, like, he's got a lesson out there of, there's a lot of young men involved in cricket that say things, and I don't think they actually understand what rape is. Like, legitimately, I think they think rape is the old-fashioned hold someone down and do it. They don't understand that about consent. They don't understand about someone being passed out in some occasions and all these sorts of things. And I think Joe Clarke had the ability to do that. As far as I'm aware, and I'm basing this also on Jonathan Liu's article, he hasn't done that. I find it harder in that sort of situation to just forgive him. But at a certain point, I think we also have to be aware that there are so many international athletes, not just in cricket, but certainly in cricket, who we personally would detest their politics, their behavior, how they look at women, how they look at gay people, how they look at races, how they look at ethnicity. That's a truth of, like, so many professional athletes have these sorts of views. They grow up in these echo chambers, and a lot of what they believe is toxic and is nonsense. And sometimes they act on it, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they encourage it, sometimes they don't. It's where do we draw the line at where a player can and can't play? Is, I think, a very, very good conversation to have. My bigger concern with Joe Clarke is I just don't feel like he has actually really, really distanced himself from this situation in a positive way, in a way that he could have. But if he's going to play for Nottingham, for me personally, I'm like, well, he's already representing a cricket team, or lots of cricket teams in his case. To suddenly stop that in England, I'm not. I don't see that argument. But I can see why other people are certainly on that side. But it's. I definitely understand why people say he deserves a second chance, but second chances come with responsibilities as well, right? And in this particular case, I'm not sure that has been completely justified. But look, the whole thing is such a fascinating issue, and I think that maybe the bigger problem here is that we're talking about 3 articles. I'm sure there's more articles out there, but the majority of the articles in the mainstream press are written by male cricket writers. And part of the reason is that women cricket writers maybe haven't been asked, or there aren't enough of them as well, but also they don't want to get involved in these sorts of issues. Not all sports writers want to get involved in these issues. And it's, I'm more than willing to say that I'm probably not a fan of Joe Clarke, and I'm never going to back him in any sort of way. I'll try and analyze him as normally as I can if he does play, if he comes across me. But I'm certainly never going to back him. But I can also understand that the people on the other side are like, he made a mistake when he was young, and he deserves a second chance. But yeah, there's no good way of talking about this, because there are people who are going to believe he should never play again, and there are other people who are going to believe that he should definitely play again. Those two sides, as we've seen in every part of society now, they're absolutists, and it's a very hard thing. And there are probably very good points in all 3 of those articles that were written. I think I read Matt's and Jonathan's. I don't think I read George, and I certainly didn't read George's. There were certainly, good points on both sides in both of that, but that's not the world we live in, right? And it's not how we work. But at the same time, I don't think that Joe Clarke has certainly been allowed to go about having, earning money and having a living, and that is part of what being a professional cricketer is. It's a job, right? And I suppose what what some people would say is that it's a job to play it domestically and to play in franchises, and at the international level, it's at that stage you're representing the country. I kind of think at the international level, we've seen enough players, and I've certainly talked to enough players who still see that as a job, right? That's their ability to make the most money in their career more often than not. Less so now with the IPL, but we're restricting someone's earning capacity at that point. These are real things. Should he? I mean, he brought disrepute. I can't say the word now, but he brought bad things into cricket that didn't need to be involved in cricket through his behaviour. The industry, and it looks like I think the industry has already sort of blackballed him. No, what would you say? Shadow banned him in a way, because I do think he would have already played for England had he not been involved in what he has been involved with. But I think there are many players, not just for England, right across the board, who have done things that should have seen. That should have seen them suspended, or should have seen much harsher terms on them, and it hasn't happened. And I don't know if cricket is in the position to be a moral arbiter, being that cricket itself is not particularly the cleanest sport that it should be, and is not always ahead of these issues. It was only, what was it, the 2012 or the 2016 World T20, when the women were getting paid a lesser per diem than the men were at the same tournament, right? Not the same as what Joe Clarke was involved in, but it's all from the same pot, right? The women weren't. Are we saying women have less laundry and want to eat less for dinner time? It's kind of a ridiculous thing to give them a smaller per diem. So, cricket is in that weird spot, and I think you find this with sports right across the board. I think one of the most interesting things in the world at the moment is the NBA and China. It's such a fascinating relationship, and you see them everywhere. But thanks for your question, mate.